This happened a few months ago. I've been driving for Lyft for years now, mostly late-night shifts. The roads are quieter, the tips are better, but there's a trade-off. Every once in a while, you get a story that sticks with you, and not in a good way. I always thought of myself as careful. I've dealt with my fair share of odd passengers, but nothing came close to what I'm about to tell you. I didn't have a dash cam back then. That night was the reason I installed one. It started off normal enough, just me and the odd sounds my beat-up 2005 Volvo would make. Reliable as hell, but not exactly quiet. The streets were deserted, like they always are after 2 a.m. That's when I got the request. A pickup from a convenience store nearby. Seemed harmless, but for some reason I got this feeling in my gut. You ever get that? Like something's off, but you can't explain why. That's exactly what hit me as I drove up. Before I even saw him, I knew something was wrong. The store was closed. No lights, no cars. And then I saw him. He was pacing outside wearing this ratty hoodie with a hole in the sleeve. His movements were jerky, like he couldn't stand still. He kept glancing over his shoulder like he thought someone was after him. I should have canceled the ride. I even hovered my finger over the button, but I didn't. For whatever reason, I unlocked the doors. He didn't say a word, just sat there staring at me through the mirror, not blinking, not looking away, just staring. I tried to ignore him, turned on the radio to break the silence. But the moment the music started, he snapped at me to turn it off. His voice was deep, raspy. I could tell he was a smoker. It caught me so off guard I swerved a little. I did as he said, gripping the wheel tighter. We drove in silence for a while. I thought maybe he'd just sit there quietly until we got to his stop. But then he spoke. Ever pick up someone you shouldn't have? That question hit me like a brick. I let out this awkward laugh, said, I hope not. But he didn't react, just leaned back and muttered something I couldn't hear. Then he started talking about how he used to drive for Uber, said some punk stole stuff from his car. He was slurring his words, but I got the gist. And the whole time, he was smiling. A normal person wouldn't smile talking about something like that. It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you. That's when I realized he wasn't just some crazy drug addict. He was a threat. My pulse was racing. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was spinning. I glanced at the GPS, focusing on the destination like it was some kind of lifeline. But he didn't stop talking. He kept babbling, some of it gibberish, some of it... Then he started apologizing. Not to me, though. To someone else. He kept saying, I didn't mean it. Over and over. I didn't respond. I didn't know what he'd done, but I wasn't about to find out. We were only a few minutes from his stop when he snapped out of it and yelled at me to pull over. I did. My hands were shaking. I just wanted it to be over. As soon as I shifted into park, headlights appeared behind us. A police car. I said a silent prayer as it crept past, its spotlight sweeping over my car. The guy in my back seat slouched down, like he was trying to stay out of sight. I turned my head and saw him lying flat on the seat, eyes closed. He stayed like that for what felt like forever. Then without warning, he lifted his head and said, You got lucky. Before I could react, he opened the door and disappeared into the night. I ended my shift early that night. I was too shaken to keep driving. It wasn't until weeks later that I found out how dangerous that situation really was. According to a news article, a convenience store had been robbed that night, 2 blocks from where I picked him up. The description of the suspect matched the man in my car. I was inches away from a criminal who could have hurt me, or worse. I never reported it. I try to avoid law enforcement for personal reasons, but I'll never forget that night, and I'll never let my guard down again. Be careful who you let into your life. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that could have ended much worse.